Reuben Travis just wanted coffee, not a zoning violation notice zip-tied to his front gate. The chill in the Wyoming air nipped at his knuckles as he bent to examine the laminated sheet. It flapped slightly in the wind, tethered by a bright orange zip tie that didn't belong on his weathered cedar post. The bold print caught his eye first: Simmons Ridge Homeowners Initiative, Visual Compliance Review underway. Below that, a box was checked in red ink: potential violation detected. He blinked twice, then read it again. The edges were clean, the formatting oddly formal, like someone had spent hours in a word processor pretending to be a real authority. It was too much effort for a prank and too little sense for a legal document. Reuben stood there in the fog-draped morning, steam rising from the mug in his free hand, the warmth doing little to soften the sharp edge of confusion growing in his chest. Linda, his oldest goat, bleated from the barn with the urgency of a creature who believed breakfast should never be late. He ripped the zip tie with a tug, folded the notice twice, and tucked it into the inside pocket of his flannel jacket. Then he sipped his coffee, took a long look down the gravel road, and muttered, "Well, that's new." The drive into town was quiet, as usual. Fence posts flashed by with the rhythm of habit, and the dashboard radio buzzed softly with AM static. A familiar voice spoke of low frost warnings, deer migration patterns, and a new brand of feed at Dalton's. Reuben's truck rumbled up to Cedar Cafe just as the open sign flipped in the window. Inside, the air was thick with coffee and the sweet, fading aroma of fried bacon. Darlene was already behind the counter, wiping the chrome with one hand and pouring with the other. "Well, look who the goats dragged in," she said without turning. "Morning," Reuben replied, setting his mug on the counter. Darlene slid a fresh cup his way. "The usual?" He nodded and took a seat near the window. The first sip brought a familiar warmth. Outside, the fog was beginning to lift. "You get your flyer yet?" she asked, casually refilling the sugar dispenser. Reuben looked up. "What flyer?" She pulled a folded piece of paper from her apron. "These things. Tomorrow's new initiative. HOA something or other." He took it from her and compared it to the one in his jacket. Same header. Same formatting. "Is this a joke?" Darlene smirked. "It's Tamara Kinley. You decide." Reuben grunted. "Pretty sure I didn't sign up for any neighborhood oversight." Darlene shrugged. "Didn't sign up for property taxes either, but here we are." Later, at the sheriff's office, Glenn Morrow leaned back in his chair, boot crossed over his knee, chewing a toothpick like it might explain the universe. "Probably just Kinley again," he said, glancing at the document. "Far as I know, there's no Simmons Ridge HOA on file. Nothing's registered with the county. So she's making up an association now?" "Looks that way," Morrow said. "She's been pushing something about visual standards at council meetings. Got shut down twice. Maybe this is her workaround." Reuben shook his head. "It's one thing to play pretend. It's another to nail stuff to my gate." "Not illegal," Morrow added, "but real close to it." "Close enough to worry?" Morrow shrugged. "Keep the sign. I'll look into it. Don't go punching anybody yet." Reuben returned home in time for Linda's afternoon tantrum. The goats were restless, pacing the fence line like they sensed something out of place. He fed them slowly, checking his toolshed and barn for anything missing. Everything was where it should be, until he rounded the corner of the barn. There, centered on the wide side wall, was another sign. Larger. Laminated. Stapled clean into the wood with industrial heft. "Enforcement review pending," it read, followed by a series of bullet points in legalese. He stared at it a full minute before pulling it down. The staples didn't give easily, and the last one sliced his thumb. Blood welled in a neat line. Reuben sucked the sting away and glanced toward the tree line. That's when he saw it, a white SUV idling just beyond the pines, partially obscured, engine quiet. The windows were tinted, the kind of deep black glass that didn't belong in Dry Creek Ridge. As soon as he turned to face it, the vehicle rolled backward, silently, and slipped behind the hill. He stayed still for another beat, then walked slowly toward the house. The gravel crunched beneath his boots in time with the beat of his heart, steady, practiced, unafraid. He paused at the front porch, took a breath, and stepped inside. The air was still, the same scent of old pinewood and coffee grounds hanging in the corners. He closed the door and locked it behind him, just like always. Then he noticed the envelope. A manila folder sat neatly at the center of his kitchen table. No name. No stamp. Just sitting there, like it had grown out of the wood itself. He didn't leave the door unlocked. The envelope had a welcome packet, aerial photos of his barn, and a form titled Voluntary Correction Notice, Phase 1. Reuben Travis stared at it from across the kitchen table, as if the pages might arrange themselves into something reasonable if he gave them enough time. The manila folder had no return address, no official seal, just a series of printed diagrams, photos, and a cover sheet with a cheery serif font that read, "Welcome to Simmons Ridge, Guidelines for Harmonious Coexistence." The aerial images were sharp, taken from angles that would have required more than a ladder and a zoom lens. One shot showed the top of his barn. Another, the fenced-in goat pen. In one photo, he could even see the cracked mason jar he used to prop open the rear storm door. He flipped the form labeled Phase 1 over. The language was formal but vague. Violations were circled: unapproved fencing materials, livestock density imbalance, satellite dish visibility. Reuben grunted, setting the papers down and rubbing his jaw with the back of his hand. There was no phone number. Just an instruction: return by post or by hand to Simmons Ridge Compliance Officer. The sun was climbing higher now, burning off the morning fog. He grabbed his coat and headed into town, the envelope tucked under one arm like an unwanted invitation. At the county records office, the clerk, Betty Harper, sat behind the glass window, sorting files with a sort of quiet vengeance known only to retirees and bureaucrats. "Betty," Reuben said, holding up the folder. "You ever heard of the Simmons Ridge Homeowners Initiative?" She pushed her glasses up and leaned toward the window. "That sounds made up." "Yeah, well, someone put this on my property." He slid the contents through the pass slot. She took her time reviewing the documents, murmuring under her breath. "Nothing on file here. No charter, no board registration, no community plan under that name." "What about private associations?" "Privates still gotta register if they want teeth. Otherwise it's just suggestions in Times New Roman." Reuben nodded once. "Appreciate it." Back outside, the breeze had picked up. He stopped in at Cedar Cafe for a refill and a bit of overhearing. Darlene poured him half a cup before he even sat down. "Any more love notes from our HOA fairy?" she asked. "You hear that name around here?" he asked, fishing the folded form from his jacket pocket. "Oh sure," she said, sliding a bowl of sugar packets his way. "Tamara Kinley's been printing things off at the library. Some new group she's running, Community Standards or something like that." Reuben leaned back. "Tamara, huh?" "She's harmless," Darlene added, but didn't quite meet his eyes. He stirred his coffee slowly. "Yeah. Harmless people don't usually hand out correction notices." Outside the cafe, he sat in his truck for a minute longer than necessary, the heat wheezing from the vents. A memory surfaced: Afghanistan, 2003. A town council meeting that turned out to be a sting. Laminated signs, matching armbands. All the trappings of legitimacy wrapped around a very local brand of control. He drove back home without the radio on. That afternoon, Reuben unrolled the aerial photos across his workbench. The angle of the sun, the direction of the shadows, they didn't match satellite images. He opened his laptop, typed in coordinates, and checked freely available sources. Nothing lined up. The pictures were too close, too crisp. He logged into an old account he hadn't touched in years and cross-referenced the photo metadata. Commercial drone tags. Timestamped 2 days prior. Whoever sent this hadn't used Google Earth. They'd flown something over his land, recently, and with purpose. That set him moving. He circled the barn, checked the rafters, walked the fence line. Years of signals work had trained his eyes to spot patterns, irregularities. Linda bleated her annoyance as he climbed the side ladder, checking under the eaves. There it was. A motion-triggered camera no bigger than a deck of cards, tucked beneath the lip of the gutter, disguised in a plastic housing painted the same color as the siding. Reuben pulled it free gently, studied the lens. The casing had no brand. The back was sealed shut. No serial, no QR code. Just 2 small letters etched in the corner, SR. He didn't say a word. Just took it inside, placed it on the table beside the packet, and made a fresh pot of coffee. As dusk fell, he didn't bother turning on the porch light. The goats settled early. The wind shifted, and clouds moved across the moon. Around 11 p.m., a set of headlights flickered in the distance. Then nothing. Reuben turned off the lamp. He stood in the dark, behind the curtain, watching the gravel road through a sliver in the blinds. Someone had pulled up just beyond the tree line. The engine was still running. But the lights had been killed. The shape of the vehicle, broad, squared edges, looked familiar. It just sat there, parked sideways, as if it had no intention of moving. Watching. She arrived in slacks, pearls, and orthopedic flats, like a PTA president with a vendetta. The white SUV kicked up dust as it rolled slowly up Reuben's gravel driveway, tires crunching like something deliberate. He was out front, feeding Linda a chunk of bruised apple, when he saw the car crest the rise. He watched it stop with that particular brand of confidence he recognized from years in uniform, the kind that came from people who believed they had the upper hand. The driver's door opened. Out stepped a woman in her late 50s, dressed like she was headed to a church bake sale, mauve slacks, pastel blouse tucked just so, pearls catching the sun, and sunglasses too big for the size of her head. She held a 3-ring binder in one hand like a badge. Behind her, a younger woman exited the passenger side. Ellie Kinley. Reuben hadn't seen her in nearly 10 years, not since the county science fair where she'd won first place for a project on soil nitrates. She had her mother's sharp chin but none of the polish. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and she kept her eyes fixed on the ground as they approached. Tamara Kinley came to a stop just shy of the front porch and offered a politician's smile, tight, practiced. "Mr. Travis," she said, voice pitched high with forced cheer. "Tamara Kinley. I'm here on behalf of the Simmons Ridge Homeowners Advisory Committee." Reuben didn't shake her hand. He set the apple core down on the porch rail. "You're on private land." Tamara's smile didn't budge. "As designated compliance liaison, I'm permitted a 30-foot approach buffer under ordinance." "There's no ordinance," Reuben cut in. She held up the binder. "We're a volunteer initiative formed to uphold visual and environmental standards in the Greater Dry Creek Ridge region. Our charter outlines enforcement phases, documentation procedures, and neighbor-to-neighbor accountability systems." She said it like it was scripture. Reuben took the binder from her, flipping it open. The first page was a cover sheet with a logo that looked suspiciously like clip art, an eagle perched atop a picket fence. Inside were color-coded tabs, noise thresholds, structure aesthetics, animal ordinance. "You filed this with the county?" he asked. "We're in the awareness phase. Formal filings are pending community integration milestones." Reuben snorted. "So, no." Behind Tamara, Ellie shifted. Her hands were clasped in front of her, knuckles tight. She didn't look up. Tamara forged ahead. "You were issued a Phase 1 packet, which I assume you've reviewed." Reuben didn't answer. "We're now entering Phase 2, structured notice and reclamation scheduling. If you'd like to resolve this cooperatively, we recommend enrolling in a compliance coaching session. It's peer-led N." "No," Reuben said, flat. Tamara reached into her binder and produced a yellow sheet with official-looking lines. "This is a preliminary violation warning under Simmons Ridge Initiative protocols. Effective immediately, your property is designated Class B nonconforming." Reuben took the form slowly. "Do you think any of this is real?" Tamara tilted her head. "We believe in community standards." You printed this on an inkjet. We believe in accountability. You're standing on land that's been in my family since 1946. Nobody needed a binder to figure out how to raise goats back then. Tamara's smile grew brittle. Mr. Travis, property reclamation begins next week. You'll be contacted. She turned on her heel, pearls flashing like an afterthought. Ellie lingered a second longer before taking a small step forward. She extended another form, green this time, labeled owner response sheet. Her fingers trembled as she handed it over. Ellie, Reuben said gently. She flinched at her name, then looked past him, toward the barn, the field, anywhere but his face. You're better than this, he said, quiet enough so her mother wouldn't hear. Ellie didn't reply. She followed Tamara back to the SUV. The door shut with a mechanical thunk. The vehicle reversed, spun gravel, and vanished down the ridge. Reuben stood there a long while. The goats meandered near the fence, indifferent to legal threats. He turned the green form over, scanning its blank back, until something caught his eye. In the corner, faint but legible, someone had written in pencil. You're not the only one. Reuben's security light triggered at 2:13 a.m., just in time for him to see someone tripping over a wire, and Linda the goat charging into action. The barnyard erupted into a chaos of floodlight and bleeding. A high-pitched yelp followed the unmistakable thud of boots against dirt. Reuben, crouched beside the feed-room window, had a perfect view through the grainy black and white security feed, one figure stumbling face-first into the gravel, another spinning toward the sound with a flashlight raised too late. And then Linda, broad-shouldered, shaggy, and vengeful, charged like a four-legged linebacker with horns. The man barely had time to turn. There was a muffled grunt and a sharp crack as he went down. Linda pranced backward triumphantly, her tail flicking like she'd just defended her title. The second intruder scrambled, knocking over a wheelbarrow as he tried to retreat. Lights flashed across the barn roof, and the siren Reuben had rigged to an old hunting horn let out a long, ragged wail. From inside the house, Reuben switched camera angles on the monitor, heart steady but jaw set tight. Two men, both masked, wore matching khaki vests with black lettering, too distant to read clearly, but uniform enough to make him pause. They moved like they were used to sneaking but not to improvising. They hadn't expected resistance. And definitely not a goat with a grudge. By the time Reuben stepped out onto the porch with his flashlight and a length of steel pipe tucked under his arm, the men had vanished back toward the tree line. He didn't chase. He waited. Watched. Then walked the fence perimeter. Near the irrigation box, the tripwire lay limp, its tension spring broken where the first man had stumbled. A set of boot prints led out toward the east field, ending where the ground turned to dry scrub. He found the clipboard halfway buried under a scatter of straw near the barn. It was slick with condensation, the corner cracked. Reuben brought it inside and laid it on the kitchen table under a lamp. The top sheet was a printed map, his property, outlined in red. Next to his name, typed in bold, Alpha Resistance Node. He stared at it a while, sipping cold coffee he'd meant to reheat. The second page was a list of review subjects, some names he recognized, most he didn't. A few were crossed out in marker. When the sun came up, the frost hadn't yet melted from the fence posts. The barn door creaked when he opened it to check on the goats. Linda stood proudly near the feed bin, a scrape on her flank and a satisfied gleam in her eye. You earned your oats, Reuben muttered, filling her trough a little higher than usual. An hour later, the sheriff's cruiser rolled up the driveway, tires crunching on gravel. Morrow stepped out, looking tired before his second cup of coffee. You all right? He asked. Had visitors, Reuben replied, handing over the clipboard. Masked. Organized. Ran like they'd done it before. Morrow read the top sheet, his brow furrowing. This is more than a prank. Two men. Matching vests. Same language as that binder Tamara dropped off. Morrow flipped a page. You see this name? He tapped a line halfway down. That's the Harper's place. They moved out last week. Quiet. Said it was too much upkeep. They were on this list. Marked as, compliant achieved. You think it's connected? Reuben nodded. Starting to look like a pattern. They stood in silence for a beat, the only sound the low rumble of a distant tractor and the squeak of the windmill behind the shed. I'll run this up the chain, Morrow said. But don't expect much. HOA stuff tends to fall through jurisdictional cracks. This isn't HOA. It's theater. With costumes. Morrow didn't argue. Later that morning, Reuben sat back on the porch with a fresh mug. Linda napped in the sun nearby, tail twitching in her sleep. The clipboard was gone, handed over for evidence, though he doubted it would end up anywhere useful. The rumble of a car broke the quiet. He looked up to see a small sedan approaching. It was Ellie. She drove slower than her mother, her eyes cautious even before the vehicle stopped. She stepped out, shut the door gently, and walked halfway up the drive before speaking. They told me not to come here. But you need to see this. The binder Ellie slides across the table is heavier than it should be, and has tabs labeled Phase 2, Pressure. It landed with a soft thump on the kitchen wood, pages shifting under their own weight. Reuben eyed it like a dog stares down a coiled snake. The tabs stuck out in pastel colors, green for Incident Protocols, yellow for Resident Engagement, red for Escalation Authority. Ellie sat across from him, hands wrapped tight around a mug of black coffee. She hadn't said much since stepping inside, except to ask if they were alone. Outside, the low rumble of thunder echoed across the hills, still far off but crawling closer. I found it in a locked drawer in Mom's study, she said, voice low. There were 3 copies. This one had your name flagged. Reuben reached forward slowly, flipping the first page. Simmons Ridge Initiative, Tiered Enforcement Framework. The print was too clean, too confident. Someone had designed this like a policy brief, sparse language, bullet points, fake citations. Phase 1, Visual Notification. Phase 2, Psychological Pressure. Phase 3, he trailed off, tapping the divider with its red tab. There's no Phase 3 section, Ellie said. Just a placeholder. He turned the pages carefully. Aerial photos, some taken from above, some angled in from a ridge that looked like it could have been behind old Ned's property. One showed Reuben feeding the goats. Another, his barn's open door. Another, a shot through the cabin's back window. You could see the reflection of the kitchen clock. She's been watching me, Reuben muttered. She's watching everyone, Ellie said. Even me. Reuben glanced up. I found my own name, she went on. Under Internal Asset Calibration. It listed what I post online. What friends I've kept. Whether I've been compliant. He rubbed his temples. Jesus. I didn't know, she whispered. At first I just thought it was Mom being intense. She's always been like this. Projects. Lists. But this. Reuben stood, moved to the stove, and poured her more coffee. His hands moved steady even though his pulse had picked up. Why now, he asked. Why bring this to me? Ellie stared into her mug. Because last night, she got a message. After your siren went off. She looked afraid, but not surprised. Said, he's resisting sooner than expected. Then she pulled a second binder from her bag and started writing. Not typing. Writing. Reuben sat back down, quiet for a long moment. The storm outside crept closer, wind shaking the window panes slightly, goats braying in short bursts like they, too, sensed the change. He opened a tab labeled Resident Behavior Matrix. His name was listed under Tier 3, Strategic Obstructionist. Below it, age, 60s. Military background, yes. Psychological profile, autonomous, low persuasion index. There were scores, notes, charts. He turned the page, and there it was, a full diagram of his property, drawn to scale, notated with timestamps and observations. She's not alone in this, Ellie said. She's getting funding. She's reporting to someone. Ruben nodded. You tell Morrow yet? Not yet. He stood and picked up the phone from the wall. The cord stretched as he dialed. A few rings, then the sheriff's voice came through, tired and annoyed. Glenn, Ruben said, I've got something you need to see. It's not just laminated signs anymore. A pause. Then, bring it in. I'd rather not leave the property unattended. Another pause. All right. I'll come by tonight. Before Ruben hung up, he glanced again at the binder, flipping to the very back. A thin sleeve contained a folded flyer, stiffer than the others. He pulled it out and unfolded the paper. Tier 3 non-compliant resident re-education seminar, required attendance. There was a time, date, and location. The address was Tamara's house. Re-education, he said aloud. They're not even pretending anymore. Ellie didn't speak, but her face told him she'd read the same page more than once. Later, as the rain began to tap against the roof, Ruben stepped outside to check the mailbox. The air smelled of damp wood and ozone. He reached in, expecting bills. What he found was laminated. Same flyer. Same date and time. But this version had something extra. A photograph of his kitchen window, taken from outside, at night. Inside, his own silhouette sat frozen mid-step, the coffee pot in one hand. He stood there in the rain, holding the plastic flyer like it might burn through his palm. They had been watching. The flyer appeared on every neighbor's front yard, do not engage with non-compliant properties, Tier 3 enforcement pending. By the time Ruben pulled into town, the signs were impossible to ignore. Staked in neat angles into frostbitten soil, laminated against the morning dew, each bore the same stark font and HOA emblem, a picket fence encircled by stars. On the corner of each flyer was a red X, hastily marked but uniform. His name wasn't printed, but everyone understood. At the general store, the usual nods were absent. Darlene, who always greeted him with a refill before he sat, barely looked up. The feed store manager rang up his order without comment, and the total had climbed by nearly 15%. When Ruben questioned it, the man simply said, "New inventory markup," and avoided his gaze. Out in the parking lot, a fresh flyer had been taped to the back of Ruben's truck window. It read, "High risk, subject refused re-education engagement." The ink was smudged, but the message was clear. He tore it down and folded it neatly, placing it in the glove box beside the stack of forms he'd started collecting like war medals. He drove slowly back toward the square, dust curling behind his tires, the weight of stairs pressing against him like wind he couldn't escape. That afternoon, word spread fast. Tamara was holding a community emergency briefing at the town square. No chairs. No stage. Just a folding table, 2 loudspeakers, and a stack of printed charts. Ruben didn't announce his arrival. He parked a block down and walked in with his hands in his pockets. The square, usually filled with friendly faces and idle talk, felt colder now. Lines had formed, not around booths, but between people. Tamara stood behind the table, wearing a navy windbreaker embroidered with the HOA insignia. Around her, a dozen townsfolk milled quietly, clipboards in hand, a few wearing reflective vests that looked recently ironed. She tapped the mic. "We're under siege," she began, voice unwavering. "And the threat comes from within." A laminated poster flipped open beside her. It showed a color-coded map of the town with red zones drawn over certain homes. One of them was Ruben's. "This resident has refused all compliance protocols," she said, pointing toward the crowd, but not naming him yet. "He has obstructed dialogue, refused invitations to re-education sessions, and compromised the harmony of our shared environment." Ruben stood behind a tree, just within earshot. He could feel the shift in energy, the soft ripple of eyes moving toward where they assumed he might be. Some faces were confused. Others were simply obedient. "Silence is not neutrality," Tamara continued. "If you are not part of enforcement, you are part of the resistance." From the back of the group, he caught sight of Ellie. She wasn't wearing a vest. Her arms were crossed, eyes lowered. When she glanced up, their eyes met for a moment, just long enough to register something unspoken. Regret? Worry? Solidarity? He couldn't tell. Tamara handed out charts like communion wafers. Each of you will receive your zone map. Enforcement Tier 3 begins next week. Someone in the crowd asked, "What about the ranch?" She didn't hesitate. It's already flagged. Additional measures are in motion. Reuben turned and left before the end, the tightness in his chest too old and too familiar. He walked past the diner. Inside, a few people stared, then turned away. The smell of burnt coffee and lemon cleaner wafted out like a memory gone stale. Back at his truck, another sign had been taped to the windshield. This one simply read, "Disruption starts with you." That night, as the wind picked up and the goats settled in the barn without complaint, Reuben sat on the porch watching the horizon darken. The weight of the binder still sat heavy inside, but heavier still was the hollowing quiet of a town that had turned. He barely heard the footsteps behind him until a voice broke through the dusk. "You should leave, man. Before they escalate again." It was Marcus Dole. Reuben had helped him patch a fence line 2 summers back. They hadn't spoken in months. Reuben didn't answer. He just nodded once. Marcus was already walking away. At 4:12 a.m., the drone didn't hover, it dove, low and fast, painting a black symbol on Reuben's field. The sound was a sharp hum, insectal and precise, slicing through the pre-dawn quiet like a scalpel through cloth. Reuben had just poured a mug of yesterday's coffee when the perimeter alarm pinged, a single chime, low and urgent. He moved to the monitor in the side room, squinting at the grainy feed. 1 thermal signature, then 3. All crouched low at the northern fence line. Not animals. Not neighbors. Patterns too calculated. Then the drone entered the frame, sleek, narrow, matte black. It dipped just over the barn roof, banking hard before descending near the east pasture. Reuben's camera caught the release, a burst of mist, then a slow settling mark in dark paint. 2 slashes forming an X with a broken circle around them. It was the same symbol he'd seen in a photocopied appendix of the binder. The page had been labeled Phase 4, Correction. He exhaled through his nose and hit record on every feed. When the sun finally broke over Dry Creek Ridge, he walked out to the field and found the mark, crude but unmistakable. Spray paint, probably industrial grade, burned into the dew-covered grass. Linda skirted wide around it, her hooves silent in the fog. At the sheriff's office, Glenn Morrow didn't ask why Reuben was there early. The look in Reuben's eyes said more than words could. They escalated, Reuben said, dropping a USB drive onto the desk. Morrow opened a desk drawer and pulled out the binder Reuben had handed over days ago. "We've got county council looking. They're dragging their feet." Reuben slid a finger to the middle tab. "Have them look again, Phase 4's already started." An hour later, in the back room of the county building, Reuben and Morrow sat with a state investigator named Colton Arns. He wore a gray windbreaker with a faded agency crest and the permanent look of a man who read too many memos and not enough books. "This isn't just your property," Arns said, scrolling through satellite overlays. "We've logged 5 identical symbols across the state in the last 2 weeks. 3 in Sweetwater County. 1 near Casper. 1 outside Jackson Hole." Reuben leaned forward. "They're clearing land." Quietly. Arns nodded. "We suspect a private-public shell company. Legally gray. Possibly ex-Fed contractors." Reuben's throat felt dry. "You ever hear of RISE?" Arns paused. "Rural Initiative for Stabilized Environments?" Reuben gave a slow nod. "I helped build their Phase 1 field guide. Back in 2009. Morrow looked over. "You're telling me you wrote the playbook?" "I wrote parts of it," Reuben said, his voice quiet. "It was supposed to be used for post-disaster communities. Places overseas where civic structure was failing. Not this." Arns tapped a folder closed. "Looks like someone repurposed it." The room stayed quiet for a beat. Reuben stood. If they're marking me, they'll come back. But Ellie, she's in danger now. They all looked up as the door cracked open. Ellie stepped inside, holding her phone like it was a grenade. They know, she said softly. Reuben moved to her. What happened? She showed the screen. A message glowed beneath a blocked number. Tier 2 designation confirmed, complicit with primary target. Reassignment pending. Beneath it, a symbol. The same broken circle, with her initials typed beneath. Reuben's face hardened, not with fear, but something older. The same look he'd worn once in a tent outside Kandahar, when the wrong convoy showed up ahead of schedule. We need to move, he said. We don't wait for the next step. Ellie just nodded, her hands trembling. When Tamara Kinley saw the real sheriff's cruiser pull into her driveway, she didn't run, she reached for her binder. The sun hadn't fully climbed over Dry Creek Ridge yet. The air was crisp, edged with the scent of pine and the quiet tension of a town holding its breath. Reuben stood beside Sheriff Morrow as the cruiser rolled to a stop at the edge of the Kinley property. Behind them, a county official in a pressed blazer and a clipboard exited a second vehicle, expression neutral but alert. Tamara opened her front door before anyone knocked. She was dressed like always, pressed blouse, pearls, and a calmness that felt more like a mask than a mood. In her hands was the same binder Reuben had seen before, though now it bulged with more tabs, more color-coded systems that meant nothing and everything. You're making a mistake, she said, cool as morning shade. You first, Morrow replied, handing her the warrant. Tamara's eyes flicked across the document. She said nothing as she stepped aside and let them in. The entryway was immaculate. Too immaculate. Reuben followed the scent of lavender polish and controlled down the hallway toward what used to be a guest room. Tamara didn't lead them. She didn't need to. The false wall behind the bookshelf gave itself away, barely perceptible seams in the paint, a latch recessed behind a copy of Community Cohesion Strategies. Morrow pressed it. The panel clicked open. Inside, the room was cold. No windows. Fluorescent lighting. And walls of data. Maps of Dry Creek Ridge stretched from floor to ceiling, dotted with pins in red, blue, and black. One corner of the room held binders, dozens of them, each labeled with a name, a property number, and a compliance status. Another wall featured a bank of dark monitors and a corkboard labeled Phase 4, Behavioral Reinforcement. Reuben pulled a folder from a stack. His own photo stared back at him, clipped beside a table of timestamps, feeding schedules, perimeter walks. A notation at the bottom read, Subject exhibits high defiance but low volatility. Node rating, Prototype Tier A. Morrow muttered something under his breath. The county official just kept taking pictures. Tamara stood in the doorway, binder clutched to her chest. We're reclaiming what's been neglected, she said, voice unwavering. People need order. They need guidance. You falsified legal notices, Morrow replied. Surveilled residents without consent. Coordinated unauthorized enforcement actions. I coordinated accountability. Then Ellie's voice broke through, quiet but firm. No, Mom. You lied. She stepped forward, pulling her phone from her pocket. She hit play. Tamara's voice echoed from the speaker, recorded late at night, the tone looser, more candid. They don't get it, Elle. These people resist change like it's a birthright. So we nudge them. Just a little. And if they don't move, we push harder. Reclaim. Reassign. Replace. Silence followed. Tamara blinked, then turned toward her daughter, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. You don't understand what's at stake. I understand exactly, Ellie said. I was part of it. The county official nodded once. That's enough. They cuffed Tamara there in her foyer, the pearls catching one last bit of sunlight before disappearing into the shadows of the hallway. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. No one cheered. No one booed. They just watched. One by one, neighbors began pulling down the laminated flyers posted on their lawns. Someone peeled a Tier 3 warning off the side of Ruben's truck. The signs came down faster than they'd gone up. By the next morning, the town square felt different. Quieter. Less patrolled. At Cedar Cafe, Darlene poured his coffee without asking, and this time she smiled. Weeks passed. Ruben sat on his porch, Linda lounging beside him like a watchdog who'd earned her rest. The breeze rustled dry leaves along the fence line, and the fields looked more like they used to, unwatched, unclaimed. Ellie pulled up in a small sedan, 2 paper cups in hand. She walked up the porch, set one beside him, and sat without a word. After a moment, she handed him a flash drive. This was in her safe, she said. Your name's on it. Ruben took it slowly, held it in his palm. The plastic felt heavier than it should have. Later, inside, he plugged it into the laptop. One folder. One file. Pilot Site 002, Dry Creek Ridge, observation complete. The town of Dry Creek Ridge now sits quieter, its fields no longer marked by fear but by the slow return of trust. What began as one man's quiet resistance revealed something deeper: how quickly rules can become weapons when left unchecked. True order, as folks came to see, doesn't come from binders or badges, it comes from neighbors who look out for one another, even when it's hard. Like a weathered fence held up by faithful hands, a community only stands when each post leans into the next.